When Amanda first started attending yoga classes, I was all for it. She worked hard as a teacher, managing kids all day, and deserved time to relax. I even encouraged her when she said she was staying late afterward to socialize with her new yoga friends. But that was 3 months ago. Now, her yoga mat sits in the corner, untouched and collecting dust. I noticed little changes first. The way she'd smile at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. How her late nights stretched from an hour to 2, then 3. The faint whiff of expensive cologne on her clothes when she hugged me goodnight. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Amanda had always been loyal, the kind of wife you could count on. We'd been married 10 years, built a life together, and had 2 beautiful kids, Emily and Tyler. But doubt had a way of creeping in, seeping through the cracks until it was all I could think about. One night, as Amanda kissed me goodbye and left for yoga, I decided to follow her. It wasn't planned. I just couldn't sit there, staring at the clock, wondering anymore. Grabbing my keys, I slipped out the door and drove toward the yoga studio. I stayed a safe distance behind her car, my palms slick against the steering wheel. When she passed the turn for the studio and headed toward the city, my stomach dropped. I trailed her to a hotel, parking far enough away that she wouldn't see me. My heart raced as I watched her climb out of the car, her sleek black dress a far cry from the yoga pants she used to wear. She disappeared inside, and I waited, torn between storming in after her and staying put. After a few agonizing minutes, the decision was made for me. A man stepped out of a car a few spaces over, adjusting his tie as he walked toward the hotel entrance. It was Logan, my best friend, my children's godfather. I stared through the windshield, my body frozen as Logan disappeared into the hotel lobby. The world around me seemed to blur, the buzzing of my thoughts drowning out everything else. Logan? It couldn't be. He was more than just a friend. He was family. We'd been inseparable since college, groomsmen in each other's weddings, and he'd been there for every milestone of my life. And now, he was meeting my wife at a hotel. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I told myself I had to be wrong. There had to be some explanation, a business meeting maybe, but deep down I knew better. I stepped out of the car, my legs shaky as I moved toward the hotel. I didn't have a plan, just a burning need to know the truth. The lobby was warm and bright, a stark contrast to the chill in my chest. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on the elevators just as the doors slid closed. Amanda was inside, her gaze locked with Logan's. I turned and walked back out into the night, the weight of their betrayal settling over me like a lead blanket. By the time I got home, it was well past midnight. The house was dark and quiet, the kids long since asleep. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at nothing, my thoughts spiraling. How long had this been going on? Every shared laugh between Logan and Amanda, every lingering glance. They played back in my mind, their meaning twisting into something darker. Had I been blind? When Amanda returned home an hour later, I was still sitting there. She walked through the door with a smile, her cheeks flushed. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down. "Did you wait up for me?" I nodded, my throat too tight to respond. She kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar. "You should go to bed. It's late." As she climbed the stairs, I stayed rooted to the couch, my fists clenched at my sides. In that moment, I made a decision. If Amanda and Logan were lying to me, I was going to find out just how deep their betrayal went. And then I was going to make them pay. The next morning, Amanda moved through the house as though nothing had changed. She smiled as she poured cereal for Emily and Tyler, kissed me on the cheek as she handed me my coffee, and hummed softly as she packed the kids' lunches. It was maddening. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her like a hawk. Every movement, every word felt calculated, like a perfectly rehearsed act. I couldn't decide what angered me more, the betrayal or the ease with which she pretended everything was fine. When Amanda left to drop the kids at school, I sprang into action. Her phone was always glued to her side, but I had a small window of opportunity. I rushed upstairs to our bedroom and found her backup phone, a sleek, older model she rarely used but kept charged. It wasn't locked. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. Most were mundane, reminders, group chats with other moms, work texts. But one thread caught my attention. It was unnamed, no profile picture, but the content was damning. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. My breath caught as I read the message. It was from Logan. There was no doubt in my mind. I scrolled further, my stomach churning with each new exchange. They were careful not to use names, but the tone was unmistakable. Flirtation, intimacy, secrets. I snapped a photo of the messages with my own phone before carefully placing hers back where I found it. By the time Amanda returned, I was back at the table, feigning normalcy as I worked on my laptop. "Everything okay?" she asked, setting her purse on the counter. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable, then nodded. "Good," she said, walking upstairs. As soon as she was out of earshot, I called Logan. "Hey man," he said, his tone light. "What's up?" "Not much," I said, my voice steady. "I was just thinking about grabbing a beer later." "You free?" "Yes, sounds good," Logan replied. "What time?" 7, I said. "Perfect. See you then." I hung up, my heart pounding. If Logan was going to lie to my face, I was going to let him, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it. By the time I arrived at the Copper Pint that evening, I had rehearsed every word of the conversation in my head. The anger boiling inside me was tempered by one goal. I needed Logan to feel comfortable, to let his guard down. When I spotted him at a corner booth, casually sipping a beer, I forced myself to smile. "Hey man," Logan said, standing to greet me with his signature grin. "Logan," I said, shaking his hand and sliding into the seat across from him. We made small talk at first, reminiscing about old college stories and sharing updates about our families. Logan laughed easily, his charm as effortless as ever. But the laughter felt hollow to me now, every joke tinged with the knowledge of what he'd done, or was still doing, with Amanda. "So, how's work been treating you?" I asked, my tone casual. Logan shrugged. "Busy as always, but good. Can't complain." "And Amanda?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "She mentioned you two bumped into each other recently." Logan's hand froze halfway to his glass, his expression flickering for a split second before he recovered. "Oh, yeah," he said, nodding. "At the store a while back. She was picking up snacks for the kids." The lie came so smoothly, so easily, that it made my blood boil. As the evening wore on, I began steering the conversation in a new direction. "Do you ever miss the old days?" I asked, swirling my beer. "When things were simpler?" Logan chuckled. "All the time. Life's a lot messier now, huh?" "You could say that," I replied, leaning forward. "People change. Relationships change. You think you know someone, and then you find out you don't." Logan's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly masked it with a sip of his drink. "Yeah," he said carefully. "That's life, I guess." I pressed on, testing his limits. "You know, Amanda's been acting weird lately," I said, watching him closely. "Says she's going to yoga, but I don't know. Something feels off." Logan's eyes widened slightly before he quickly shook his head. "Come on, man," he said, forcing a laugh. "Amanda's solid. She wouldn't— I mean, you're probably overthinking it." "Maybe," I said, my tone cold. "But if she was hiding something, I'd find out." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Logan shifted in his seat, his usual confidence cracking ever so slightly. "You're a good guy, Ethan," he said after a moment. "Amanda's lucky to have you." The hypocrisy of his words was almost too much to bear. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile. But inside, I was seething. When the night ended, I shook Logan's hand and watched him walk out the door. The image of him smiling, laughing, pretending to be my friend burned in my mind. He thought he'd gotten away with it. But he was wrong. The drive home from the Copper Pint was a blur, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. Every word Logan had said replayed in my mind, his lies slipping out so easily it made my skin crawl. He thought he'd fooled me. But I wasn't the same man who had watched Amanda and Logan disappear into that hotel. I wasn't frozen by disbelief anymore. Now I was planning. When I got home, the house was quiet. Amanda was asleep in our bed, her face serene in the dim light. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her. Part of me wanted to wake her up and confront her, to throw Logan's name in her face and demand the truth. But I didn't. I had a better idea. The next day, I called Alan Chase. He wasn't just a private investigator. I'd heard about him through mutual acquaintances, the kind of guy who didn't just uncover secrets, but knew how to leverage them. "You sure about this?" Alan asked after I explained the situation. "Absolutely," I said, my voice firm. All right, he said, but I'll need access to your house. Hidden cameras, microphones, whatever it takes. Do it, I said without hesitation. Over the next few days, Alan installed discreet recording devices throughout the house. I gave him free rein, staying out of his way as he worked. He assured me the cameras were undetectable, the kind of equipment designed to capture every angle without anyone knowing. The guilt I'd expected to feel never came. Amanda and Logan had crossed the line first. Now it was my turn. I waited patiently, letting the cameras do their work while pretending everything was normal. Amanda continued her usual routine: school drop-offs, yoga classes, and late-night tech sessions she thought I didn't notice. But I noticed everything. Every smile she gave me felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Every laugh, every casual kiss goodnight. All of it was a lie, and I was recording it all. A week later, Alan called. "I've got something," he said, his voice clipped. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "There's a pattern," he said. "Every time Amanda leaves for yoga, she's texting Logan. And the conversations aren't just casual." He sent me screenshots, messages pulled from the encrypted backups on her phone. "Amanda, last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about it. Logan, same here. Can't wait for the next time." The rage that surged through me was like nothing I'd ever felt before. My best friend, my wife, together. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. That night, after Amanda went to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. My mind raced with plans, each one darker than the last. By the time the sun rose, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to destroy them. The morning light filtered through the curtains, but it did nothing to warm the cold resolve that had settled over me. Amanda hummed softly in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast for the kids, her movements as effortless as ever. She smiled when she saw me, handing me a plate of eggs and toast. "Morning," she said brightly. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. It took everything in me not to confront her right then and there. But I needed more proof, more time to finalize my plan. After the kids left for school, I met with Alan to review the recordings he'd captured. "Here's the latest," he said, handing me a USB drive. "You're going to want to sit down for this." I plugged the drive into my laptop, my hands shaking as I clicked on the first file. The video showed Amanda sitting on our couch, her phone pressed to her ear. "I can't talk long," she said, her voice low. "Ethan's upstairs." The audio was clear, every word hitting like a sledgehammer. "I miss you," Logan's voice replied. "When can I see you again?" Amanda smiled, her fingers tracing patterns on the arm of the couch. "Soon," she said. "I'll make something up." I clenched my fists, the laptop screen blurring as my vision filled with red. "There's more," Alan said, his tone grim. He played another file, this one from the dining room camera. Amanda sat at the table, scrolling through her phone as she texted. The text appeared on the screen in real time, mirrored from her phone. "Logan, Friday night. Same place. Amanda, can't wait. I'll tell him I have a yoga retreat." I stared at the screen, my anger boiling over. "That's it," I said, slamming the laptop shut. "I have enough." "Enough for what?" Alan asked, raising an eyebrow. "For the truth," I said, my voice cold. "And for payback." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I stayed patient, pretending everything was normal, while I fine-tuned every detail of my plan. The family gathering was coming up, our annual barbecue, where friends and loved ones would come together to laugh, eat, and celebrate. It was perfect. Amanda and Logan wouldn't see it coming. The night before the barbecue, Amanda was unusually affectionate. She wrapped her arms around me as we watched TV, her head resting on my shoulder. "Tomorrow's going to be fun," she said, her voice soft. "Yeah," I replied, my tone flat. She tilted her head to look at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "You okay?" "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. She nodded, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. As Amanda fell asleep that night, I stayed awake, rehearsing every step of what was to come. This wasn't just about confronting her. It was about exposing the lies. The morning of the barbecue dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that begged for laughter and good company. Amanda was in high spirits as she bustled around the house, preparing food and organizing the patio. "This is going to be great," she said, setting a tray of burgers on the counter. "Everyone's excited to come." Her excitement felt like a mockery. Yeah, I replied, my tone neutral. She looked at me for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly, but then she shrugged it off and went back to her preparations. By mid-afternoon, friends and family began arriving. The kids ran around the yard, chasing each other with water guns while the adults chatted over drinks. Logan was one of the first to show up, carrying a cooler of beer and wearing his usual charming grin. "Ethan," he said, clapping me on the back. "Looking good, buddy." "Logan," I said, shaking his hand. The sight of him standing in my home, laughing with my wife and joking with my kids, made my blood boil. But I kept my anger in check. "Not yet." Amanda floated through the gathering like the perfect hostess, her laughter ringing out as she entertained our guests. She and Logan exchanged glances occasionally, subtle enough to go unnoticed by others, but not by me. I saw everything now. As the afternoon wore on, I made my rounds, chatting with guests and keeping up appearances. But my mind was focused on one thing, the moment when the facade would come crashing down. The hidden camera footage was ready, loaded onto a tablet I'd set up in the living room. The plan was simple. Gather everyone inside under the pretense of showing a family slideshow, then play the recordings. Amanda and Logan wouldn't know what hit them. Around sunset, I called everyone inside. "Hey everyone," I said, raising my voice above the chatter. "Before we dig into dessert, I put together something special for the family. A little slideshow of memories." Amanda beamed, her eyes sparkling. "Oh, Ethan, that's so sweet." "Yeah," Logan chimed in, raising his beer. "Let's see it." I nodded, my stomach churning as I led the group into the living room. As everyone settled onto couches and chairs, I picked up the tablet, my hands steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I think you'll all find this enlightening," I said, glancing at Amanda and Logan. Amanda frowned slightly, tilting her head. "What do you mean?" "You'll see," I replied, pressing play. The screen came to life, displaying the first video, a clip of Amanda on the couch, whispering into her phone. "I can't talk long," she said, her voice trembling. "Ethan's upstairs." Logan's voice followed, clear and damning. "I miss you. When can I see you again?" The room fell silent. The second clip played immediately after, showing Amanda typing on her phone at the dining table. The text messages mirrored on the screen left no room for interpretation. Logan, "Friday night. Same place." Amanda, "Can't wait. I'll tell him I have a yoga retreat." Gasps filled the room. Amanda's face went pale, her hands flying to her mouth. "Ethan," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I don't," I said coldly, cutting her off. Logan stood abruptly, his face a mix of shock and anger. "What the hell is this?" "This," I said, my voice rising, "is the truth. The truth about what you've both been doing behind my back." The chaos erupted instantly, Amanda sobbing, Logan yelling, and our guests staring in stunned silence. But I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The living room exploded with chaos. Amanda's sobs filled the air, her hands trembling as she tried to speak. Logan stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, his usual confidence obliterated. The guests, our friends and family, were stunned into silence, their wide eyes darting between the screen and us. I didn't move. I stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, letting the weight of the truth settle over everyone. "Ethan, please," Amanda finally managed, her voice breaking. "This isn't what it looks like." "Save it," I said, my tone ice cold. "You've been lying to me for months. Don't insult me by trying to spin it now." She took a step toward me, her hands outstretched, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said sharply. "You've done enough." Logan found his voice then, his tone defensive. "Look, man, I don't know what you think you know, but this isn't the whole story," he said, gesturing wildly toward the tablet. "Oh, it's not?" I shot back, my anger bubbling over. "Then why don't you tell us the whole story, Logan? Tell everyone here what you've been doing with my wife." The room went dead silent again, every pair of eyes locked on Logan. He hesitated, his face flushed with panic. "It's complicated," he stammered. "Complicated?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You've been sneaking around with Amanda, lying to my face and destroying my family, but sure, let's call it complicated." Logan's shoulders slumped, his facade finally cracking. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Sorry, I said, my voice rising. Sorry doesn't cut it, Logan. Not after what you've done. Amanda dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Ethan, please, she begged, her voice raw. I was stupid. I made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. I love you. Love, I said, incredulous. You call this love? Lying to me? Sneaking off with Logan? Making a fool out of me in front of our kids? Our family? Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't waver. The guests began to murmur, some standing to leave, others too stunned to move. My mother-in-law, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. Amanda, she said, her voice trembling. Is this true? Amanda nodded, her head hanging low. My mother-in-law shook her head, tears in her eyes. I can't believe this. Logan's wife, Heather, stood suddenly, her face pale and furious. You bastard, she hissed at Logan, her voice shaking. How could you do this? Logan tried to reach for her, but she slapped his hand away. Don't touch me, she snapped. We're done. The room was descending into complete chaos, but I stayed rooted in place, watching it all unfold. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. Amanda and Logan thought they could lie to me, deceive me, and walk away unscathed. They were wrong. When the guests finally began to leave, I turned to Amanda, who was still kneeling on the floor, her sobs quieter now. You have two options, I said coldly. You can pack your things and leave tonight, or you can stay and explain to Emily and Tyler why their mother is a liar and a cheat. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Ethan, no, she pleaded. Please don't drag the kids into this. You didn't think about them when you were sneaking around with Logan, I said, my voice firm. Why should I protect you now? Logan tried to step in, his voice desperate. Ethan, come on, don't do this. Think about the kids. I turned on him, my anger blazing. You don't get to talk about my kids, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You're not their godfather anymore. You're nothing to them, or me. Logan flinched, his face crumpling under the weight of my words. When the house was finally empty, Amanda sat at the table, her face buried in her hands. I stood over her, my voice cold and unyielding. This is your mess, Amanda, I said. You clean it up, and then you get out. The house felt cavernous that night, the echoes of the chaos still lingering in every room. Amanda sat at the dining table, her face buried in her hands. Her sobs had quieted, but her shoulders still shook with the force of her crying. I stood in the doorway, watching her. A part of me, a small, dwindling part, felt the urge to comfort her. This was the woman I had built a life with, the mother of my children. But that part of me had been overpowered by the anger, the betrayal, the humiliation. I gave you everything, I said finally, my voice low but sharp. Amanda looked up, her tear-streaked face pale in the dim light. Ethan, No, I interrupted, holding up a hand. I don't want your excuses. I want the truth. All of it. She hesitated, her lips trembling. I don't know where to start. How about the beginning? I said coldly. When did it start, Amanda? How long have you been sneaking around with Logan? She winced at the venom in my tone, but didn't look away. 6 months, she said quietly, her voice breaking. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I'd already suspected the truth. 6 months, I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. 6 months of lies. 6 months of sneaking around while I was here with our kids, thinking everything was fine. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. It was a mistake, Ethan. I didn't mean for it to happen. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cold. You didn't mean for it to happen? What, did you just trip and fall into his bed? Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't let up. You had every chance to stop this, I said. Every time you left this house, every text, every phone call, you chose him over us. Amanda shook her head, her voice trembling. It wasn't like that. I wasn't trying to replace you. Then what was it, Amanda? I demanded, my anger boiling over. What was so special about Logan that you were willing to throw away everything we built? She hesitated, her eyes filled with regret. I don't know, she whispered. He was there, and I was lonely. I felt like we'd grown distant, like you didn't see me anymore. Her words cut deeper than I expected. You felt distant? I said, my voice quieter now, but still filled with anger. And instead of talking to me, you turned to him? I didn't know how to talk to you, she admitted, her voice breaking. It was stupid and selfish, and I hate myself for it. I stared at her, my mind swirling with emotions I couldn't untangle. Anger, hurt, disbelief, and something I didn't want to admit was still there, love. After a long silence, I spoke. You need to leave, I said firmly. Tonight. Amanda's eyes widened, her face crumpling. Ethan, no, please don't do this. The kids will be fine, I said, cutting her off. You're their mother, and I won't stop you from seeing them. But you can't stay here. Not after this. She stood slowly, her movements hesitant. Where will I go? I don't care, I said, my voice cold. Go to Logan. Go to a hotel. It doesn't matter to me. Her shoulders slumped as she nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll pack a bag, she said quietly, her voice trembling. As she disappeared upstairs, I sank into the nearest chair, the weight of the day crashing down on me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. The life I'd known was over. Amanda was upstairs for a long time, the sound of her footsteps faintly audible as she moved around our bedroom. I sat at the dining table, staring at the half-empty glass of water in front of me. The house was silent except for her movements. Emily and Tyler were asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm that had torn through their family. For now, when Amanda finally came downstairs, she was carrying a small suitcase. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she set the suitcase by the door. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Ethan, please don't do this. Let me stay for the kids. I shook my head, my jaw tight. You made your choices, Amanda. Now you have to live with them. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I don't want to hurt them. Then you should have thought about that before you brought Logan into our lives like this, I said coldly. Her shoulders sagged, and she wiped at her face, her tears relentless. Can I at least say goodbye to them? She asked, her voice trembling. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to make her walk out without another word. But the kids deserved more than that. Fine, I said finally. But don't wake them. You can see them in the morning. Amanda nodded, her breath hitching as she walked to the stairs. I watched her go, a mixture of anger and sadness churning in my chest. A few minutes later, she returned, her face even more broken than before. They were sleeping so peacefully, she said softly, her voice raw. I kissed them goodnight. Please tell them I love them when they wake up. I didn't respond, staring at the suitcase by the door. Amanda lingered for a moment, as if waiting for me to say something, anything, that would change what was happening. But I stayed silent. Finally, she picked up the suitcase and opened the door. The cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the finality of the moment. She looked back at me one last time, her face a mixture of sorrow and regret. I'm sorry, Ethan, for everything. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing with everything that had happened. I wanted to feel relief, vindication, something. But all I felt was emptiness. Amanda had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But she was still the mother of my children, the woman I'd once built my life around. And now, she was gone. The next morning, Emily and Tyler came downstairs, their faces bright with excitement. Where's Mom? Emily asked, looking around. I forced a smile, my heart breaking at the question. She had to go on a trip for a little while, I said gently. Will she be back soon? Tyler asked, his big eyes filled with innocence. Not for a little while, I said, my voice tight. But she loves you very much. They seemed to accept the explanation, turning their attention to breakfast. But I knew the questions would keep coming, and eventually, I'd have to tell them the truth. For now, though, I focused on the day ahead. The road to rebuilding our lives would be long and difficult, but I was determined to give my kids the stability they deserved, even if it meant facing the wreckage alone. The house felt different without Amanda. The usual hum of her presence, the soft laughter, the faint sound of her music playing while she cooked, was gone. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like a void, one I couldn't quite ignore. But life didn't stop. I had Emily and Tyler to think about, and their world couldn't crumble just because mine had. The morning after Amanda left, I dropped the kids off at school, their cheerful chatter a welcome distraction. Are you picking us up later, Dad? Emily asked, her voice hopeful. Of course, I said, forcing a smile. Can we get ice cream? Tyler chimed in, his face lighting up. We'll see, I said, ruffling his hair. As I watched them walk into the school, their backpacks bouncing, I felt a pang of guilt. They deserved so much better than this. Back at home, I faced the mess Amanda had left behind. Her things were still everywhere. Clothes in the closet, photos on the walls, her favorite coffee mug sitting on the counter. I grabbed a box and began packing. It wasn't anger driving me this time. It was necessity. Every reminder of her felt like a weight pressing down on me, and I needed to breathe. Halfway through the process, I found an old scrapbook tucked into a drawer. It was filled with pictures of our life together. Our wedding, vacations, birthdays, the first days with Emily and Tyler. I sat on the floor, flipping through the pages, each image tugging at a different memory. I wanted to hate her, to erase everything we'd shared, but the truth was more complicated. Amanda's betrayal had shattered me, but it hadn't erased the good times we'd had. That realization hit harder than I expected. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores and errands. I threw myself into anything that kept me busy, anything that kept my mind from wandering. By the time I picked up Emily and Tyler, I was exhausted but grateful for their energy. Can we go to the park? Emily asked, her face lighting up. Yeah, Tyler added, bouncing in his seat. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure. At the park, I watched them run and play, their laughter filling the air. For a little while it felt like everything was normal, like the cracks in our family hadn't formed yet. But as I sat on the bench, the weight of what lay ahead settled over me. I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was rebuilding theirs too, and I wasn't sure I was ready. The days following Amanda's departure were a blur of routine and forced normalcy. I buried myself in the kids' schedules, school drop-offs, soccer practice, bedtime stories, doing everything I could to shield them from the cracks forming beneath the surface. But every night, when the house was quiet and they were asleep, the weight of everything came crashing down. I sat in the living room one evening, staring at the scrapbook I hadn't been able to pack away. The memories it held were too powerful, too raw. Each page told a story. The day Amanda and I met, the first home we bought together, Emily's first steps, Tyler's first Halloween costume. It wasn't just a scrapbook. It was our life. And now it felt like it belonged to someone else. A knock on the door snapped me out of my thoughts. I frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 9, too late for a casual visitor. When I opened the door, I wasn't surprised to see Logan standing there. Ethan, he said, his voice low. Can we talk? Every muscle in my body tensed as I stared at him. His face was pale, his usual confidence replaced with something closer to desperation. I don't think there's anything left to say, I replied, starting to close the door. Please, he said, his hand on the frame. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I hesitated, the urge to slam the door warring with a need for answers. Finally, I stepped aside. 5 minutes, I said coldly. Logan stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room as though he expected Amanda to appear at any moment. Where is she? He asked, his voice hesitant. She's gone, I said bluntly. Packed a bag and left. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I am sorry, Ethan, for everything. You're sorry? I repeated, my voice rising. You destroyed my family, and all you have to say is sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen, Logan said, his voice breaking. I swear, it got out of control. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet room. Out of control? You were sneaking around with my wife for 6 months, Logan. That's not out of control. That's a choice. Over and over again. He looked down, his hands clenching at his sides. You're right. I screwed up. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know. I never wanted to hurt you. Funny, I said, my tone cutting. Because that's exactly what you did. Logan took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging. I know I've lost you as a friend, and I don't blame you for hating me. But please don't take this out on Amanda. She made mistakes, but she loves you. She loves your kids. His words ignited a fresh wave of anger. You don't get to talk about love, I snapped. You don't get to tell me how to handle this. You forfeited that right the moment you walked into that hotel with her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with all the things we'd never be able to say. Finally, Logan nodded. I'll go, he said quietly. But for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't respond as he walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where Logan had been. The anger and betrayal were still there, but now they were joined by something else, something I didn't want to admit. Grief. After Logan left, the silence in the house became unbearable. The kids were asleep upstairs, their quiet breathing the only sign of life in a home that suddenly felt empty. I sat in the living room, staring at the door Logan had walked out of, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and confusion. Why had I let him in? What did I hope to gain from hearing his excuses? I poured myself a drink, the amber liquid catching the dim light as I raised the glass to my lips. It burned on the way down, but it did nothing to dull the ache in my chest. The truth was I wasn't angry just at Logan or Amanda. I was angry at myself. I'd built my life around trust. Trust in my wife, trust in my best friend, trust in the foundation we'd all shared. And I hadn't seen the cracks until they'd shattered everything. How could I have missed the signs? The stolen glances, the laughter that lingered just a bit too long, the excuses that seemed so harmless at the time. Had I been blind, or had I chosen to look away? The next morning, I woke to the sound of Tyler knocking on my bedroom door. "Dad," he called softly. "Come in," I said, my voice hoarse. He opened the door, his small frame silhouetted by the hallway light. "Are we still going to soccer practice today?" I blinked at him, momentarily caught off guard. "Yeah, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "Of course we are." At practice, I sat on the sidelines, watching Tyler run across the field with his teammates. His laughter echoed across the park, so pure and carefree that it almost broke me. He didn't know. Neither did Emily. To them, everything was still normal. But the questions were coming. I could feel them looming on the horizon. And when they came, I'd have to find a way to answer them without breaking their hearts. After practice, I took the kids out for ice cream, their faces lighting up as they dug into their cones. "Mom loves this flavor," Emily said, her voice cheerful. I froze, the spoon halfway to my mouth. "Yeah," I said after a moment. "She does." "When's she coming back?" Tyler asked, his big eyes filled with curiosity. My throat tightened, and I forced myself to smile. "Soon," I said, hating the lie, but unable to tell them the truth. "She just needs some time." That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in hand. I stared at Amanda's contact for what felt like an eternity, my thumb hovering over the call button. Part of me wanted to hear her voice, to demand answers to the questions that still lingered. But another part of me, the part that felt like it was finally starting to heal, knew better. I set the phone down and walked to the living room, the scrapbook still sitting where I'd left it. I opened it to the first page, running my fingers over the photo of Amanda and me on our wedding day. I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it away. Instead, I closed the book and set it on the shelf where it belonged. Some memories weren't meant to be erased. The days turned into weeks, and the routine I'd built with Emily and Tyler became my anchor. Mornings were filled with packing lunches and reminding them to grab their homework. Afternoons were soccer practice and school pickups. Evenings were bedtime stories and their laughter echoing through the house. It was exhausting, but it was also grounding. Amanda called once, her voice hesitant as she asked about the kids. "They're fine," I said, keeping my tone even. "Can I see them?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They're not ready," I replied. It wasn't entirely true. They asked about her almost daily, but I wasn't ready. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "Okay," she said quietly. "Please tell them I love them." I hung up without replying. Logan didn't call. I suspected he knew better. Whatever guilt he'd expressed the night he came to my door wasn't enough to erase the damage he'd done. His absence was a relief, but it also left a hollow space where our friendship had been. It was strange mourning someone who was still alive but no longer a part of my life. One night, as I was helping Emily with her homework, she paused and looked up at me. "Daddy, why doesn't Mommy come home anymore?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Tyler looked up from his coloring book, his big eyes filled with curiosity. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "Mommy and I are taking some time apart," I said carefully. "We both love you very much, and that will never change." Emily frowned, her little brow furrowing. "Did we do something wrong?" "No," I said quickly, pulling her into a hug. "You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't about you. It's just grown-up stuff? The conversation stayed with me long after they'd gone to bed. The guilt of shielding them from the truth weighed heavily on me, but I knew they weren't ready to hear it. And maybe I wasn't ready to say it. The next day, I reached out to a therapist. Not for me, but for the kids. I just want to make sure they're okay. I told the receptionist over the phone. It's a good first step, she replied, her voice kind. I scheduled the appointment, hoping it would help them process the changes they couldn't yet understand. That evening, as I tucked them into bed, Emily wrapped her arms around my neck. I love you, Daddy, she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I love you too, I replied, my voice thick. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. I was going to be okay. We were going to be okay. The first time I felt truly at peace again, it caught me off guard. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Emily and Tyler were sprawled on the living room floor, laughing as they built a fort out of couch cushions and blankets. The sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a golden glow. Their laughter was infectious, and for the first time in weeks, I found myself smiling without effort. I joined them on the floor, pretending to be a monster that threatened their fort. They squealed with delight, piling pillows on top of me as I growled in mock anger. Daddy's the funniest monster ever, Emily declared, her giggles filling the air. Rawr! I bellowed, reaching out to tickle them. Their laughter was pure and unrestrained, and in that moment, the weight I'd been carrying felt lighter. The weeks since Amanda left had been a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, and a sense of loss that felt like a physical ache. But there had also been moments of clarity, glimpses of what life could be like without the lies and betrayal. I was learning how to find joy again, one day at a time. Later that evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, the cool night air brushing against my face. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, and I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Amanda. Amanda, how are the kids? For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But then I typed a reply. Ethan, they're good. Happy. Her response came quickly. Amanda, I'm glad. Thank you for taking care of them. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Ethan, it's what they deserve. The conversation ended there, but it left me with a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Amanda's choices had broken us, but they didn't have to define me. I was moving forward. Not for her, not for revenge, but for myself and my kids. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Emily and Tyler giggling in the kitchen. When I walked in, they were covered in flour, their attempts at making pancakes clearly going off the rails. Surprise, Daddy, Emily said, holding up a misshapen pancake with a proud grin. It's perfect, I said, laughing as I grabbed a spatula to help. As I flipped pancakes and listened to their chatter, I realized that this was enough. I didn't need Amanda's approval or Logan's friendship. I didn't need to dwell on what I'd lost. What I had, my kids, my home, and a future that was mine to rebuild, was enough. That night, as I tucked Emily and Tyler into bed, I felt a calm I hadn't known in months. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for it. We were going to be okay. No, better than okay. We were going to thrive,